Our next speaker is Jody Westby, and like all the other speakers, I'm not going to read the bio, but it's very impressive, and I'm really honored that she is actually speaking at our event. That's because, you know, we reached out to her probably about 2 weeks ago, and I'm glad that she could manage her time. I know she's very busy, but I'm very, very grateful that she could manage this time for us. And I am so looking forward to her presentation, and I'm sure you will like her as much as I have liked her.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be here. There's one thing I'll always make time for, and that is helping women in the field of technology, and especially to understand how they can advance and gain leadership roles. So today I wanted to talk about how cyber governance and privacy are really a wonderful opportunity for women, and how you can undertake within your own organization actions that will help you advance cyber governance and privacy management where you work. So I want to start, it's not letting me advance. Why not? There, okay. So I want to start by just talking about what happens when we have cyber attacks. We all know that data gets disclosed or stolen. We all know that there's ransomware now, but maybe what we don't really understand is how much of the data gets zeroed out or corrupted, and how confidential and proprietary information gets sold to competitors or used for fraudulent and nefarious purposes. There's really a lot of fallout from all these incidents. And then we have a lot of our laws around personally identifiable information. So there's the HIPAA protections for medical information. There's what we call NPI, or non-public information, that is financial data. There's also, though, classified or defense data. And breaches of these types of data elements often will trigger laws and contractual clauses and cause a lot of harm to organizations. There are also what we call now the clickless attack, where we don't have to open something or click a link. That if you are running software that is out of support and has a vulnerability that's unpatched, then criminals can detect who's running this equipment, and they can exploit it to gain access to your system. And many companies are not aware too of how websites and web applications are really very vulnerable. They're a threat vector now. And when a web application vulnerability is exploited, then that can create a lot of harm and an entry path into the systems of the company. There's also, denial of service attacks. We still have those. We have a lot of botnet activity that people don't really realize. But what this does is causes operational, financial, legal, and reputational risks to the companies. Can you advance, Sarah? Why can't, oh, maybe, wait, I see an arrow. Let me try that. Okay, I figured it out. So what's causing all this? Well, part of it is just our operating environment today. We operate 24/7. We're connected globally, as Sonia just showed us so beautifully, how she could span the miles from United States all the way to Bangladesh and give us such a brilliant presentation. Well, we have complex system architectures now. Everyone's using clouds plus outsourcing their own devices. We have Internet of Things devices. Now we have 5G coming up with all kinds of additional things hanging on the networks, through our taking advantage of technology. And then we also have the privacy compliance requirements and cybersecurity compliance. And these are also drivers of cyber risk, because they pose substantial risk to companies who are not in compliance. And part of the problem with the privacy and the compliance requirements is they don't get integrated into cybersecurity programs. You can have these laws out here and know them, But if you haven't integrated that into the cybersecurity program through the thing ISACA people know best, controls, if you haven't integrated those things, then it doesn't matter that they're sitting out here and you know of them. It's a real driver of cyber risk. And then we have a lot of trouble in investigating and attributing, finding out who's doing a cyber attack, and then even prosecuting them. And also another driver is that management simply is behind. They're like the kid in school that doesn't want to learn math or science. They just kind of don't want to learn this techie stuff. And so they just want to give it to some person. And you go, we have a tech person, an IT person, they're responsible for all that. And that's not how it works. So the lack of governance, the lack of defined roles and responsibilities, that's also a huge driver of cyber risk. So as we go through this today, it would help me to know, what is your current role? Are you in IT? Are you in information security? Are you in internal audit, a privacy person? Are you in management? Are you business operations? So now I see the responses coming in, and not surprisingly, internal audit is leading, but followed by information security. Looks like management and IT are a close third place. But wow, what a nice blend of people in the audience. Thank you all for joining. That's really great. 35% internal audit, 30% information security, management 14, IT 12, and business operations 8. So that's good. Thank you. So now, do I click share results? Can I just close that? Is that okay? I guess. All right. So now I want to talk about why this is an opportunity for women. It's an opportunity for women because organizations are being targeted by cyber criminals, and the privacy regulators are really sharpening their pencils. Whenever there's a major cyber event, it's always the same outcome. The bad guys win, the companies keep losing, and the victims have to have their data disclosed and end up cleaning up whatever happened. So good cyber governance, though, and privacy risk management can change this. But it's easier said than done. So it's an opportunity for women because we are really skilled at multidisciplinary activities. We can assume multiple roles at one time, and we're just sort of natural at that. We connect the dots and we problem solve. We excel in compliance and controls, and we nurture maturity. Now, that's not to say men don't do those things too, but women are especially skilled at multidisciplinary activities and connecting dots. I think that's just because of the many roles that we've always played in our lives and in society. So whether you're involved in privacy or cybersecurity, internal audit or management, organizations need people that will link privacy and cybersecurity to business operations. This is called cyber governance, and it doesn't have to be at the management level. In fact, I'm convinced, and I've spent years looking at the cyber governance field, I'm convinced that even though cybersecurity cultures come from a tone from the top, the troglodytes up here need this pushed up to them because they just aren't doing it. So I'm going to tell you today how I think this is a real opportunity, and no matter what role you're in, how you can advance cyber governance and actually advance in a leadership role in your organization. So first, let's look at what is cyber governance. So its governance structure is at the board and senior executive level, and it requires proper oversight of your key risks and vulnerabilities. And it ensures that the directors and the officers receive timely information about these risks because they're supposed to manage them. Well, now we have a standard. It's actually been out there since 2014, but you would be amazed how many people are unaware that there is a standard for governance of information security. And it's with ISO, and it's part of the 27,000 series for information security, which is the gold standard for cybersecurity standards and best practices. So it's the link. Governance is the link between the governing body and executive management and those responsible for implementing an information security management system. So it provides the mandate essential for driving the information security initiatives throughout the organization. There's laws that require governance. For example, our HIPAA law and the Federal Information Security Management Act. Plus, there are organizations, government entities that are regulators, such as the Federal Trade Commission, the FFIEC, the Federal Financial Institution Examination Council, the SEC, then the New York Department of Financial Services and the National Association of Insurance Commissioners have come out with model laws on data security. NAIC did. New York Department of Financial Services passed a law that said, all you financial institutions have to do cyber risk assessments. Your officers have to sign off on this annually and file this with us, so that some of the laws and regulations are really advancing cybersecurity. So, and governance. But when you look at it, look at this little formula I put at the bottom of the screen. Cyber governance is really compliance, plus then protecting the data and processes of the organization. It's a cybersecurity program. And if you get to that, you get to risk management and cyber governance. So let's just go back and take a look at the standard that I mentioned, ISO 27014. So the objectives of this are to align the information security objectives and strategy for information security with the business objectives and strategy. You know, IT can't be the tail that wags the dog. Businesses have to operate and IT have to support that, not tell the business how to operate. So the objectives of governance is to align the information security strategy with the business strategy, to deliver value to the governing body and the stakeholders, primarily always the stakeholders, and to ensure that this risk is being adequately addressed. So that's accountability. There's 6 principles that the standard has. One is that information security is everybody's job. It's everybody's responsibility. That's important for a governance standard. It's like you can't just throw this to the people at the top. You can't just say this is an ISO person, a CISO person, or an information security officer or an IT person. This is everyone's job. And the cyber governance is risk-based. So you have to consider, what's the risk appetite of the organization? Are compliance requirements being met? What are the investment processes? Does the security support all of that? And are the compliance requirements integrated into the information security policies and procedures? Again, we're back to that, taking a compliance requirement and integrating it in a security program. And having a positive security culture with training, and then reviewing the controls and the program's ability to support the business requirements. So those are all the things that comprise cybersecurity governance. Right now, the status is primarily boards and directors think that they need to ask interesting questions at least a couple of times a year. And that just doesn't, it's not going to work anymore. So this is a slide. Keep this slide. It's your 12 primary activities for exercising cyber governance. And this is good for whatever level in the organization, and I will show you how when we work down to this, these activities, you can play a role. So first is the governance structure. That can be, you know, an internal team at the operational level, and it can be, of course, the executives and the board. Understanding the cyber vulnerabilities associated with the operations, and then identifying those key information flows, the key information flows that executives and boards need to have to manage the risk. All the time, people try to manage an incident without telling the executive team or the board, or what do we tell them, especially the board, do we tell the board yet? Well, yes, tell the board. Make them be part of this, make them be accountable for this, and identify the legal compliance and financial exposures. Most importantly, there has to be set a tone from the top. to approve top-level policies of privacy and security risks. Senior management has to say privacy and security are two of the highest priorities of this company or of this organization, because if people can't trust us, then we're not trusted in the marketplace. It has to be, roles and responsibilities for this has to be assigned. Even though it's everybody's responsibility, there has to be leadership for privacy and cybersecurity. The board has to know which activities out of all of those things that are being performed, do they really need to keep their eyeballs on? They don't want to know all the details, but they have to know what are the key risks, what are the key information flows that will tell us about those things, and what are the key activities that are being done that we need to make sure are being done right, and look at the outcomes of those activities. Part of that is reviewing budgets and annual risk assessments. Also, it can be to retain a trusted advisor to advise them and see if the actions that they're doing are really moving them forward. We know there's a shortage of IT and security personnel right now, so a lot of people don't have the level of expertise perhaps they should have or would like to have in an organization. So retain someone to periodically give advice and to review things. And most importantly, well, not most, but equally importantly, is the evaluation of your cyber insurance. There's a client I'm working with now that just had a serious breach, and they did not have cyber insurance, and this has been a painful process for them. So now I want to come to question 2. Let's start with that about what does your organization have? Does it have a CIO or a dedicated IT person? And I put this dedicated person here because companies call people different things. But do you have someone that's responsible for IT? Do you have someone responsible for information security? Do you have someone responsible for privacy? Do you have a risk manager? And do you have a board risk committee? Now, maybe not if you're pardon me, a very small organization. But if you're a larger organization, you should have some of these people. So let's see what the audience tells me. And what happened to the answers? They went away. Okay. Well, a lot of people say they have a dedicated person for IT. That's up to like 65%. Only about a quarter are saying there's someone for information security. Only 3% are saying for privacy. That surprises me. 4% for a risk manager and 3% for a board risk committee. So my guess is there's some smaller organizations here, but enough that you have a dedicated IT person, but only about a quarter of you have an information security person. That's very helpful. Thank you for that. So now let's talk about compliance, because that was the first, get rid of these. Okay, 62% said you had an IT person dedicated, 25% information security, 3% privacy, 6% risk manager, 4% a board risk committee. So that's good. So when we look at compliance, which is that first part of the formula down here, it's looking at privacy and data protection. Everybody kind of knows that. But it's also looking at what's reasonable cybersecurity practices, because we have 25 states in the United States that require some sort of privacy security or cybersecurity program to protect data. 25 states. People know, oh, I think all 50 now have a breach notification law, but there's another person in my home who's decided suddenly to print on my printer. One moment, let me turn this off. Okay, I apologize for that, but I don't want you to hear the printer going while I'm talking to you. Also, we want to look at intellectual property protection, because if a lot of companies have intellectual property, but they don't adequately protect it, and by that I mean there are certain requirements you have to do if you're going to meet the threshold for the Defend Trade Secrets Act and economic espionage. You have to identify the data that has to be protected, that's intellectual property, and this means broadly. It means, and that definition includes business strategies and all kinds of confidential information. You have to identify it, you have to mark it, your people have to know it would cause harm to the organization. So there are certain actions you have to take. Also with protection of confidential and proprietary data, or things that are export controlled, which can be manuals, information about a product or service. It's not just the plans or the design or the top product or technology itself. So all of these things, we hear people talk about privacy and PII or HIPAA data, but you don't hear people talk about all of these other areas. And it's very important because that your data is what really your company operates on. And so it's very important to take a broad view when we look at compliance in cyber governance. It's more than just the data that's required by privacy. When I go to companies and I look at what is your information security program, you know what? I don't see anything other than maybe a list that a privacy person's put together for, oh, here's the data subject to privacy requirements. Oh, what about everything else? And you need to know about everything else, because when you have an incident, you need to know what data is involved, who owns it, how critical is it, what business unit needs it to operate. And if you don't have that, you're sitting around asking questions and you're operating by the seat of your pants, which is not a good way to go. So when we look at compliance, we have to look at the big picture. And this is a slide, it's a graphic that I put together years ago. It's in my book, A Roadmap to an Enterprise Security Program. But I like it because it shows all of these different things that go into a security program. It's not just the technical stuff of how do the servers and the routers work and all that. You'll see over here, it's the operating environment and your operational criteria. Culture, the business plan and strategic goals, your digital assets. It includes assessments and audit findings, the risk management plan, your enterprise security strategy, legal and cybercrime considerations, standards and best practices you're following, requirements for business disaster and continuity, incident response. All of these things funnel in and go into creating an enterprise security program. And there are best practices that drive cybersecurity. So your organization should be complying with at least one cybersecurity best practice, whether it's NIST or the ISO series. I think that the ISO series is wonderful. It's very well written. It's flexible enough for businesses of different sizes to adapt to it. It's not nearly as prescriptive as NIST. The NIST 853, their control guide alone is 500 pages. It's just too much. But if you may be in an industry where you have to comply with NIST, and if so, fine, but I prefer the ISO, but you should have to comply with something, but you may have more. If you take credit cards, you're going to have the payment card industry standard, the PCI standard. If you're a utility, you'll have the North American critical infrastructure protection regulations for cybersecurity. But then look at the 5th or 6th entry down here. Here you guys are, ISACA. You're always in my presentations because you have the control objectives for information and related technologies, COBIT. It's a great standard, and it's an information technology, something we should be hearing more about with internal auditors. But this is a list for you to keep because it's the primary list of the best practices that drive cybersecurity, and they've all been mapped to one another. So if you look at a mapping, you know where you are with one, look across, you'll see whether you're complying with the other's requirements or not. So one of the key factors that you need to think about in cyber risk assessments is that there's a lot of activities to be performed in a security program, and a lot of activities that people may say, well, this is an assessment, but an assessment's not an assessment, not an assessment. You have penetration testing, you have vulnerability scanning, you can have disaster recovery testing, you can do incident response tabletops, you can do policy reviews, vendor reviews. All of those things can be called, well, that was an assessment of how are we doing? But it's not a comprehensive risk assessment of the cybersecurity program against best practices and standards. They all have a legitimate function, and they all have a key role to play. I'm not saying they shouldn't be done, but they shouldn't, those actions, a pin test, a vulnerability scan cannot replace a comprehensive risk assessment against best practices and standards. So when you decide to get one of those for your organization, you need to look at what you're buying, because there's varying methodologies. The reports can be useful or not useful. They can be overwhelming, or they can be presented in a way that lots of different people in the organization can use that report to improve the maturity of the cybersecurity program. And they can also vary a lot with the expertise of who you get to do it and the price of the assessment. But a cyber assessment is an essential part of cyber governance and a cybersecurity program, because it's your baseline. It's going to tell you whether you have the right controls to meet your compliance requirements, whether you've identified the threats in the organization and what those are, what are your gaps and deficiencies, and what are your risks? What's the impact of those gaps and deficiencies or those risks? What's the likelihood of it happening? And looking at the cyber incidents that could really have an impact on your operations or your bottom line. So an assessment also will help you determine the maturity of where you are. We call this what's your cybersecurity posture? Well, that means how mature are you? And then, of course, you can't just do these once. You have to repeat them. If you're a smaller organization, every 2 or 3 years, 3 years probably. But for larger companies, every year, you need to review it, because there's new technologies, there's new threats. You may have changed business operations, you've probably grown. All of that has to be taken into account and at least have a refresh on what you're doing. So you have your compliance, you need to protect your data and processes, and then you have your cybersecurity program. And that really moves you toward risk management. So when we have the capability maturity model, when we do assessments and you look at what is my maturity level, what's my scoring? Are we just barely doing anything? Do we have some things going, but not too much? And we really are going to have to fly by the seat of our pants if something happens? Do we pretty much have a good start? We've got things underway. We're managing cybersecurity. Or do you have it together? Do you really have the key elements? Somebody's paying attention to it, you're looking, or are you there and you're trying to improve every year? So think about maturity, because it is really how you advance your organization and how you keep it safe and how you determine what you do next. Because once you do an assessment, then you'll figure out where actions you need to undertake for remediation. And of course, you always want to look at the highest risk first, prioritize things. But you also have to look at where process improvements are really going to make a big difference and boost your security maturity. Or where low-hanging fruit are always good too, because they motivate people. They motivate employees and management to say, see, we've already done these things and our maturity is better. But you have to consider which actions are interdependent. Sometimes you have to complete one action before you can undertake the next. And you have to consider resources and how long things will take, because you don't have the resources to do everything at once, whether it's money or people. And sometimes these actions can take a while, so you have to plan with the time frame. And any action plan needs to be approved by senior management, because you have to get the money to do it, and they have to sign off, and you want them to be part of this. You have to track the progress, and you really have to incorporate the remediation activities then that you've done. Go back and fix your training, go back and fix your documentation. You have to keep all of that up to date. And an assessment will guide what you all are so skilled at, controls. Controls are so important. And sometimes we can't just have a tool that does something or technology that's going to monitor something. You need a compensating control. And these are all compensating controls. They're compensating controls even if you do have a technology. You may have to hire a third-party service to monitor your security. A lot of smaller organizations can do that quite effectively, and it's much cheaper than hiring someone. You may have to install some technical tools, have policies and procedures, have an internal team, train people, Train them not just about that boring, change your password, don't ever share your password. You have to train people on the threat environment and explain to them, for example, if I put information up on social media, how can that be exploited? What do criminals do with that information? How do they use that to link me to my employer, to link me to other colleagues or friends? That then if they spoof and send you something pretending to be a friend, then you're more likely to open that, to click on it. So training has to bump up a couple levels and start matching the threat environment. And we have to involve sometimes outside organizations to bring in the expertise they have. That can also be a compensating control. Also, strengthening your incident response and strengthening the governance. All of these can be compensating controls in a cybersecurity program. So now let's look at question 3. How do you feel your organization could do better? And it may be all of these things. I don't know if is the poll set up to do that, but can you check as many as would apply? Is that possible, Sarah?
Sorry, what was the question?
Can they click as many as would apply? They aren't limited to just clicking one thing, are they?
I think in this poll you are. Yeah.
Well, then click the most important. The thing area you think they could do better. Everybody's saying all of the above. Okay, well, that's one way to click more than one.
That's a good point. We'll have to add that option.
Well, for quick surveys, usually asking a person to do one thing is pretty good. But the overwhelming majority, 58% now, are saying all of the above. The next is not surprising. It's getting the management to pay closer attention. That's 12%. Then we have improving cybersecurity is 11. Understanding privacy and security compliance, that's only 7%. And developing a cyber risk strategy, that's only 6%. And then linking privacy and security in a cybersecurity program is 10. But 57% said all of the above. So that's good then. What I have is, what I'm telling you is helpful. So I want to talk about connecting the dots here, because this is really your opportunity. These are examples of what you can do. You can go talk to IT, privacy and compliance people in your organization, and security colleagues about their work. Ask them what they're doing. Ask them, well, do we have owners assigned to our data? Have we done a comprehensive risk assessment? You can just start asking questions and talking to people. People like to talk about themselves, and they usually like to talk about what they do. You say, I'm just interested. What do you do in your job? I mean, what are the things that are most important with what you do? And it doesn't really matter what role you're in. There's an opportunity here in every organization, because every organization, almost all, I say every, that's obviously not true, but a lot of organizations need people in the company willing to say, I'm interested in this. I can help us do this. And so if you just start talking to the IT people, the privacy compliance people, and security people about their work, you'll find out some pretty interesting things. Also ask, well, what are the best practices or standards we follow? Do we follow one? I mean, for when we look at cybersecurity, is there any standard or best practice that we're looking at? Go back to that slide that listed those and say, are we complying? Are we complying with it? Is there something that our organization looks to say this is how we should do cybersecurity? And ask if there's critical data and systems that have been identified and assigned owners. You have to identify the data, but also then the applications. So usually companies know their hardware. They have a list of the hardware they have in the system, but they often don't have a list of the data that they have. And they don't have a list of the they have a list of applications maybe in who in IT maintains them. That's about it. That's not consistent with best practices and standards. You need to have who owns that application, who's the custodian of it, who maintains it, where is it, where is it located? Is it in Dallas data center? Is it in our own data center? Is it in a cloud somewhere? All the things you need to know when something happens. It's really good to put those in an inventory. And then find out if the confidential and proprietary data have controls. Well, so we've identified the private information, but have we identified what's confidential and proprietary? Like pricing lists, customer lists, the strategic plan, potential information about a deal or a growth area for the company, a key strategic undertaking that is going to move the company forward or help it grow or move it in a different direction. All of that information is confidential and proprietary. Financial information, unless you're a public company, that's usually confidential and proprietary information. And that's all supposed to have special controls. But don't forget that companies now have a right to sue if their confidential and proprietary data is stolen under the Defend Trade Secrets Act. But again, you can't sue if you haven't met the requirements of the law. So you want to ask about that and find out if a cyber risk assessment's been conducted. And well, what was that? Was that against best practices and standards? Who did it? Did we do it internally? Did that result in some remediation? If you can get people to ask questions, then you can also go back and talk to your business leaders. So if you have this kind of information, then you could sit down and have a conversation with a business leader and say, I've been talking to a lot of people in the organization, excuse me. I've been talking to a lot of people in the organization about information security and privacy and just how we're doing with all that. And, I'm not sure that we've really, in talking to them, if we really identified the critical data and systems. I'm not sure that people really understand how important these are to your business unit. Do you think that this is all being supported? So if something happened that your operations could be stable? If you start asking them and saying, I just am trying to connect the dots here. Then ask legal. Have we identified all of our privacy and cybersecurity requirements? Gee, I heard this presentation that there's 25 states that have pre-breach cybersecurity requirements or some kind of cybersecurity requirements for companies. Do we have a list of all of those things? If not, volunteer to make one. Say, well, I'm going to make what's called a table of authorities. Would you look it over? Because I think I can identify the key privacy and cybersecurity laws that we need to comply with. Amazing how many big companies will do risk assessment and they don't have a table of authorities. When often in doing remediation, we'll develop that for them. But when you have an incident, you pull out that table of authorities and goes, here are all the laws we have to comply with. Which ones did this maybe trigger? It's a key point to have. And you want to find out what training is being offered. Now, you may get some cybersecurity awareness training, but do the security people, do they get sent to conferences? Do they get sent to certification classes? That's a very easy way to build expertise. It doesn't cost that much. A few $1,000s a year. Do you know how much a forensic investigation costs from the first day? People run through $50,000 before they've even blinked. And so helping your own people get training also is a motivator, but it also is a protection. So find out what training's being offered, because maybe people need to be more aware. Maybe people don't even know what's available. And now, of course, with this COVID lockdown, I read one article where it said we've advanced to 2025 in the last 6 months in our use of technology. And I think that's probably right. And because now we're seeing that there can be a whole lot of training offered virtually. People don't even have to leave the office. Ask about a formal incident response plan. Companies often don't have this. Oh, well, we have a help desk. No, a help desk is not an incident response plan. You have to have a plan with an internal team named. Identify the external people that need to be involved. Outside counsel, for example, a forensic investigator, for example, your insurance carriers. Identify all of those people and have an incident response plan where we have levels. We often will see companies with a breach plan that's been developed by a lawyer. Now, I'm a lawyer, but I like to combine my IT and legal expertise and do more on the consulting side. But find out if an incident response plan exists, and if it doesn't, offer to help develop one. Ask if the company has cyber insurance coverage. And if so, how is that determined? Often they just go buy something for a breach. Well, now attacks are multi-pronged. They can involve zeroing out data, corrupting data, encrypting data, denial of service attacks, disclosure of data, plus, yes, some privacy issues. Think back to Sony. Remember that several years ago when North Korea got mad because they had created this film that denigrated their wonderful leader. And so they attacked Sony. They zeroed out 2/3 of their servers. They stole intellectual property, 5 films. They disclosed confidential internal communications. They had all of those emails, remember, that made Angelina Jolie and a bunch of the movie stars mad at them because they were making snide or bad comments about them in their own emails internally. Those were disclosed. Their employee information and payroll was disclosed. That was a multi-pronged attack. And that brought Sony to its knees. And so you need more than a breach plan. You need a plan that will handle a multi-pronged attack, even if you're a small organization. When you're a small organization, all hell breaks loose when you have a bad incident and you don't have any idea of what to do. And with the cyber insurance, you really want to know, is it going to cover our data if it's zeroed out or corrupted? The servers or equipment if we have to throw it out and buy new? Is it going to cover our business interruption costs? All of those things are part of cybersecurity and cyber insurance. So if in talking, doing your rounds of talks, if you say, you know, I've been talking to these people, it's really interesting. How about if I'd like to kind of organize maybe a brown bag kind of little lunch meeting where we could all talk together about these things. You start forming an informal group, and everyone will start sharing and talking about, well, we really have a need to, I'm worried that our customer service information actually, you know, isn't properly protected. Maybe we don't have enough controls around it. I'm worried people may be printing off this information and keeping it in a closet in their office. All of these things, when you get people talking, it's amazing. Synergy forms and people start cooperating. And then if you start asking for responsibilities to say, you know, I've been talking to people, I'm really interested in this. And cyber governance is something that management kind of needs help with down below. I mean, could we, I'm happy to help organize this, to have an internal team that we meet once a month. I'm happy to, you know, to try to put together a list of our compliance, just because I find this really interesting. You start doing this stuff, and I promise you, people are going to start saying, go talk to her. Go talk to him. She knows this. And pretty soon, they're going to look at you as a key person that's integrating the cybersecurity, the privacy, the business responsibilities, and trying to make sure that you're connecting the dots at the operational level and pushing that information up to the management level. It's a great way to advance in an organization. And it's a great way to get a leadership opportunity. And it's desperately needed, desperately needed. And so, yeah, so that is the last slide, but I want to go back now to remember the dozen there. So now if we go back to this and look at this, you can see that all those actions that we just talked about as opportunities would help you understand the vulnerabilities that the company has. Well, the order entry business unit really is one of our most critical, because the order entry business unit is the one that gets all the orders coming in, and that's where all the money comes into the company. You can identify what are the key information flows and reports that the board should have. You can start identifying the compliance and the financial exposures of what, well, if the order entry system goes down and nobody can submit any orders, then we're not going to have accounts receivable, right? So is that order entry system marked as a critical system? Do we really have a lot of controls around that to protect it? And then we have where perhaps senior management hasn't set a tone from the top. But you can go back to them. You can say, you know, I've really been looking at this, and there's a lot about tone from the top and having a high level policy. I pulled off a few samples here. Could I show these to you? I'd be happy to work up a draft if you'd like to see one, and maybe you could issue it so we have this for our own organization. On the roles and responsibilities, that's a tough one because often people don't think that they really need these full-time people. But even if they have someone assigned, but beware of segregation of duties. That's the SOD out there. Most of you control people know that well. But you really can't say one person's going to do privacy and information security and IT, or you don't have any segregation of duties. And then you really need to ensure that the security activities are getting some oversight and that risk assessments are done. And if you need to hire someone to come in and do some help the organization, it's not that expensive, and it really advances and protects the company, especially when you're looking at what type of insurance do I need, what limits are appropriate. And those two questions alone can save the day if you have a big incident. And so if you're in a smaller organization, my guess is these activities are sort of informally done. People aren't thinking about them. But if you start thinking about them and saying, you know, this is a list of stuff I think I'd like to help with this, that you will find yourself getting advancement in your organization. And more importantly, you're going to be making it more secure. And when something does happen, they're going to realize what a vital role you played in it. So with that, I want to leave some time for questions if you have any, and I want you to be, able to jot down my cell phone number there or my email. If you want to follow up and have any questions, I'm always available. And so, Sarah, do we have any questions from the audience in chat?
The very last one that I just saw before I scroll up, it says, if you could share what you have as an example for SOD. So I'm not really sure if you have anything handy.
Oh, yes, I can. So there was an organization, a client, it was a medical center that we worked with. This was several years ago, but they had a person there who was the chief information security officer. And he also happened to have a law degree. So they also named him the chief privacy officer. And so when we were working with them, I said, well, you have Gramm-Leach-Bliley, you need to comply with this. And he said, no, we don't need to do that. Well, his team thought they did, but he was a very heavy-handed manager. So they didn't feel comfortable really telling him, we think you're wrong. But they say, are you sure? And things like that. But no, we don't have to. So this is a great example because generally you might have a legal counsel saying, well, we need to comply with Gramm-Leach-Bliley. And the security guy is saying, no, we don't. And they would say, well, yes, we do. Well, why do you think so? Well, because we give people financing for their medical visits, because we sell insurance plans, because we, are in the process all the time of taking credit cards. Oh, well, so anyway, that conversation didn't happen. Now, maybe in the end, they decide, the security guy's right, this doesn't apply. But when you have this in one role, that conversation doesn't happen. It often doesn't even happen inside the person's head. They just kind of say, "Now we don't have to do that." And so segregation of duties is really, really important, because I've seen, now if you're in a large organization, I've seen this happen so many times. When you have the IT person, and usually this is really bad, you have the CISO reporting to the CIO. And that's an organizational structure we haven't been able to break. Out of all the years when we've seen risk committees, when I started evaluating governance, there 6% of the companies had risk committees. Now it's something like 70%. But this has not changed. They still have the CISO reporting to the CIO, because people think that CIOs understand cybersecurity. They don't. They understand infrastructure and IT. But you have them here. So what I've seen happen over and over again is the CIO interferes in procurements for security. No, I don't want you to use that vendor. No, I don't want the network architected that way. I don't want that configuration setting. I don't want that port closed. And then I see them interfere in procurements. I see them interfere with configuration settings for security. And I see them interfere with budgets. They take what they want for IT and leave the security budget what's left. That's a segregation of duties issue. IT and cybersecurity should be equal and should report to the COO or CEO or some level of management, CFO, chief legal officer, somebody, where they both come in, even if they report to different people, like the CISO reports to legal and the CIO reports to operations. At least you have an independent reporting line. But it's a segregation of duties issues when you have this happen with the IT person and the security person, because there's responsibilities here where it gets vested in the CIO. So we'll block that call. And so that is one example to a couple of examples. Are there any other questions?
There are some comments about your SOD discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see someone said better scenario would be IT committee looking for risk of IT procurement. I think that was a thread from other comments. I'm just going over. So opening up to all the attendees, if you have any specific question, could you kindly put it on the chat? And while we are going to get the comments, Babur, one of the person who is actually helping me with this event, he changed the polling question that you wanted to see multiple, so we can post that while there are some other questions I want to.
So now can they answer multiple? They can answer multiple choice. Is that it, Sarah?
Yes, that's what.
Yeah, that's good.
So I think it's a much better representation. I think the last time all of the above was above 50%.
Yeah, so now we have 46% say all of the above. And then I guess we have about 28% understanding privacy and cybersecurity compliance. Kind of tied with improving in cybersecurity maturity at 25% and linking privacy into the cybersecurity program at 24%. Getting management to pay closer attention is 22%, and developing a cyber risk management strategy is 20%. That's very helpful for me. You know, the cyber insurance issue it really baffles a lot of companies. They say, well, they know we need it, but they often don't know that when there's an incident, you have to notify your insurance company that there could be a possible claim. And you should pull out all the policies, pull them out, pull out corporate general liability, pull out property and casualty, pull out cyber. If you have D&O insurance, pull that out and notify all of them. Because if you have to throw out servers or workstations, it's a lot cheaper to rebuild, or excuse me, to put in a new one than to try to rebuild it. And then you run the risk that you could be restoring malware into the system. You know, these threats, advanced persistent threats, can linger in a system for 18 months. The attackers are very patient. And so often people will pull a backup and assume the backup is good and restore it when actually it contains the same malware that was there before. So eradicating malware can be really hard, and it can be just a lot cheaper to just replace the stuff and start clean. And so that would be a property and casualty claim though, because you're actually replacing hardware. Very often now, if you're a public company, there's a director and officer lawsuit after major breaches for negligence, for not paying attention. And one of the things is, guess what? It's going to start hitting all the plaintiffs, I promise. It's plaintiffs are going to start saying, you were not complying with ISO 27014. You were not engaging in governance in accordance with the internationally accepted best practice and standard for governance. You were neglecting your duties as a director and officer of the company, and therefore you're liable. And so D&O is become, in the last year especially, the number of D&O suits after major events has been a really interesting trend to watch.
Thank you very much. All right, I think there is pretty much, I think somebody had their mute button unmuted, so there was a background noise, so I apologize for that. I don't know who it was, but just to let you guys know, all these presentations will be available. And I'm looking at my time, it's 11:56. I want to actually personally thank Jody for this marvelous presentation, and also for, picking up the phone and be available for this in less than 2 weeks. So
No problem.
that's a very important thing for me, because, we wasn't sure who we can place for our third speaker. But I also wanted to thank all our speakers and also all the participants who participated in this session. This wasn't our goal to have it like this, but we are in a strange time, and Zoom is the latest style. So I think I personally had a great time. I hope everybody did. This chapter has 4,000 members, but I would like to say only a handful of the people who help us are the ones that are always helping us. And I've been involved with this chapter for a long time, and I know them personally. So it's an honor and a privilege to work with them. But I also would like to take a second to appreciate all the volunteers who helped us tirelessly. It takes a long time to organize something like this, but I would like to acknowledge all the people who actually helped me with this thing. So polling, Nicole was doing all the polling. So Nicole, if you want to open up your camera so we can see who you are.
Well, thank you.
I know who you are, but I just want other people to see who you are. So there's Nicole.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'm glad that I was able to assist today.
Thank you. We have Jose, who was also in the beginning, did some talking. So, but between Jose and some other volunteers, we had been on the call since 8 o'clock. So thank you very much, Jose. I don't know where you are, but if you want to, oh, he doesn't have the camera. I think we have quite a few camera shy people here. the other person who actually changed the polling, the last polling, Babur and I had been talking forever, and the speakers would know we actually have a pre-event session with Babur. So he doesn't have the camera, but with the ISACA logo, that's him. Babur, you want to say something?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for everyone being involved. I love doing stuff like this, and without Sarah's help, this wouldn't have been possible. So it's top-down approach is what I see, so appreciate it.
Thank you, Babur. And we have Noel. He's not camera shy. I'm glad you are not. You need to open up your camera. You need to unmute yourself. Oh, I guess he's kind of shy.
Well, thank you, Sarah. This was a fantastic program. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Particularly the female angle point of view, and that really speaks in a way that is directly and hopefully useful to the development of your careers. Fantastic speakers. Thanks, Jody, for jumping in and adding to this great program, and to all the volunteers that are behind putting these presentations together and running the meeting, basically. It takes a village, like I mentioned. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's an apt one. And thank you so much, and we hope to have you join us in our upcoming events. Please visit our website. I noticed that some people don't follow social media, so go to our website. Thanks.
Noel, I actually also wanted to acknowledge Ahmed. He's also a volunteer and has been in the background helping us with the polling and other things. So I would like to acknowledge Ahmed for this session as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And last but not least, I would like to also thank the board, the officers and the board. The reason I say that is when our original session was canceled in March, I went back to them and asked if we could do a session. We have never had these kind of conferences between July and August, but they agreed, and I am grateful that we could do this event. But please mark your calendar. This event actually happens in March. So hopefully 2021 March, we will all be in person and have a session. I welcome everybody in that sessions, and we'll have great speakers like we did this time. Thank you.